all be buddies and we'll work this thing together. We have to take time to understand the perspective of the people that are part of the partnership. And in doing that, we also have to recognize what the returns on investment are for the different partners and make sure that those are coming to them as we go forward in our relationship. How far we've come. Just a couple examples that I came across the other day. The original computer, the printer, and the delete button. Not so long ago. Also, remember when memory was something you lost with age? Program was just a TV show. Cursor was someone who used profanity. Keyboard was a piano. A web was a spider's home. Virus was the flu. And the CD was a bank account. An application was for employment. A hard drive was a long trip on the road. And if you had a 3-inch floppy, just hope nobody ever found out. So it really is about the people. And it's also about the packaging. Or in Vegas, maybe it's about the unpackaging. They say there's 5 P's, I think, out there that are important for us to remember when we talk about the people and the partnerships. And in our line of business, we've been using the adage, let's make it personal. Let's get to know the people that we want to be part of the partnerships, whether it's other law enforcement agencies, industry, academia, international partners, understand their perspective, be very sensitive to the pigeonholes. We in government like to put things in nice, little, neat stovepipes sometimes. So we have to be sensitive to doing that and not falling into the trap of doing that. And persevere. This is something that's changing all the time, so we need to recognize that we have to periodically reinvent ourselves. We have to reassess what's working and what's not, and we have to redefine our goals and objectives accordingly. As we make it personal, there are cultural barriers out there that we need to be aware of, both domestically and internationally. And as Jeff said, I actually am no longer the unit chief of the Internet Crime Complaint Center. We actually split that project in 2 about 9 months ago, which is a good thing. It shows that the government is evolving, and we're trying to do things more effectively and more streamlined. And I'll talk a little bit more about the piece that spun off of that I oversee now. But while I was the unit chief of that project, we are in West Virginia, and there's a lot of good reasons why we're in West Virginia. Actually, some very efficient reasons that we're there. And I became a resident of the state of West Virginia and got to know some of the more intricacies of the citizenry of that state. We have one of our biggest installations in West Virginia, our IDENT facility, our automated fingerprint processing group down there. We have almost 3,000 employees. When we moved that group out there, we did a real rapid sort of hiring process, and you have to put that in context for the FBI rapid hiring. But we did go through a lot of backgrounds very quickly. We tried to screen out people that really weren't interested or really weren't part of the mix that we wanted. So we asked a few, kind of screening questions of the applicants early on. This is one of the questions that we asked. We said, do you favor the overthrow of the U.S. government by force, subversion, or violence? We figured just see where they're coming from, see if it's a fit with us. A number of people said, you know what, this has got to be multiple choice, and they circled violence. So we said, maybe this is not a good fit. You kind of have to go through some of that Jeff Foxworthy analogy of things. It's kind of what you said versus what they heard. When the person says, my wife said to me, these shoes make me look fat. And you say, well, it's not so much the shoes. Bad answer. So again, these are a couple of moments in court that we actually pulled from some of our investigative files, some actual government folks or attorneys talking to their witnesses in court. And this is a murder investigation. An autopsy was being done. Do you recall the time that you begin to examine the body? The autopsy began around 8:30. Now, Mr. Dunnigan was dead at the time? No, he was sitting on the table wondering why I was doing an autopsy. Now, persistence is key here. Now, doctor, before you performed the autopsy, did you check for a pulse? No. Check for blood pressure? No. Check breathing? No. So then it is possible the patient was actually still alive when you began the autopsy? No. Well, how can you be so sure, doctor? Because his brain was sitting on my desk in a jar. But could the patient have still been alive nonetheless? Yes, it is possible he could be alive and practicing law somewhere. I'm not an attorney. So again, it's intelligence is the key. Where do we find it? How do we leverage it? And again, we can't just stand up here and say, you've got the information, we need you to give it to us faster. We got to find ways and break down some of the barriers that are out there too. Post 9/11, there's a number of silver linings, I guess, in the realizations that we've come to, and some of those are listed here above. And that's obviously terrorism is the #1 priority for everybody out there in law enforcement and government. But recognizing that terrorism tentacles and those early signs of terrorism don't often look like terrorism, so you have to be sensitive to that. Critical information regarding terrorism and other major cyber crimes that we should be working often resides with you all and will often, and more often than not, end up in your hands before it makes its way into ours. And in drafting the Patriot Act, Congress noted that terrorism is inexorably woven through the internet. There's a couple of realizations that I came across in the late 90s and following into the early 2000s that have to do with this subject. And as Jeff said, I was supervising a high-tech crimes task force that we set up in Western Pennsylvania in mid-90s into late 90s. And we started an outreach effort to partner with some of the key assets that were in that part of the country, one of which was the folks at the CERT Coordination Center at Carnegie Mellon. Very valuable group of individuals still today, now part of US CERT. But we initially started to try to team up with those folks. And I would go to a number of conferences and training events and say, hey, we really need to work together. We really can help each other out. And they'd say the right things, but you could feel that the trust just wasn't there. And we'd walk away at the end of those conferences, go back to our respective corners with our suspicions and predispositions about each other, and the connection really just never happened. So after trying that for a couple of years, we actually took an aggressive step and offered to put one of our best agents into their space. And we said, trust us. If you let us, give you this agent for a year, we believe we can break down the barriers and figure out how we can work together. And of course, the skepticism at the time was that, the FBI really can't help us. We're a lot more technical than they are. We have a bunch of knuckle draggers that are just looking to knock down doors and take computers into possession, shut down these companies, and we've got trusted clientele out there that we don't want to, compromise or have subject to, preliminary release of information that's way too sensitive. So we said, trust us, give us a chance. Well, we'll actually sign an MOU to make the rules of engagement comfortable for you. Well, long story short, we did that, and it actually worked out better than we thought. By putting the people physically together, elbow to elbow, we started to gradually break down the barriers and the predispositions, and the trust started to build. And when the trust started to build, the information started to flow, and the leveraging of each other, the ROIs expanded, and we actually found that we could help each other. There were ways that we could help each other do our mission and do our mission better. So we took that realization, and we sort of redefined what a task force is. And we decided that we had to put together public-private alliances. And we went out to the regional community at the time, which involved about 2,000 high-tech companies, and we asked them what they want, what they would need, to be part of this, to actually show up and not just endorse this conceptually, but actually own it and be part of this physical presence. And we took all that information and we formulated something that I'll describe a little bit later, but it essentially is a public-private alliance effort. It's a redefinition of a task force where we put key players together in the same space, and if we can't put you physically together in that space, we'll figure out a way to connect you in through a secure listserv or other means to make you part of that team. And that's actually evolved very significantly over the last 5 years, probably more over the last 4 years, and over the 3 years that I supervised the Internet Crime Complaint Center, that project actually came under that group, but now has spun off to a separate unit that I oversee now. That realization that public-private alliances are key and significant, and that we have to redefine the floor plan for how we come together, became part of the FBI's reorganization several years ago. And one of the things that we incorporated into that was defining the threat using industry's perspective. Asking industry to tell us what the problem is, not tell you what the problem is. Where is it hurting you? Where are you seeing the most significant impact? And not give you a preset rule of definitions, but just hear you out and see if we can make that fit into a cybercrime initiative that we can work on together. Scrolling back for a second, including not just industry, but academia into the equation was something that we came to be aware of. And I'll tell a story to you that happened around the same time we were starting to partner with CERT. It was a group from the Graduate School of International Affairs came to us from the University of Pittsburgh, and they wanted to do a presentation on international organized crime. And the professor had asked the group to do this 6-month study on how organized crime uses the internet. And their definition of organized crime was a lot of folks that were listed on our top 10 list or other agencies' websites as major criminals that we were going after, and it included not just traditional organized crime, but cybercrime, counterterrorism folks, different bad guys from around the world that they were able to access information in open source. They did a study, as I said, for about 6 months, and they put together this phenomenal analytical project that they presented to us. And we brought all the respective supervisors in from organized crime and terrorism to kind of hear what they had to say and see if they had any validity to it. And actually, the connections that they made were phenomenal. They actually took this open source data and built very good connections and relationships between foundations, real estate transactions, other financial transactions that, you know, all of us walking away from that said, wow, some great information out there in the open source. Maybe we should figure out how to leverage these talented folks more to be part of our team. So we logged that into our memories, and we left, and we said, you know, some good human resources there we might want to tap into. Well, post 9/11, they came back after most of the information on the 19 terrorists that was going to come out came out, and they noted that the information they had developed in 1999 actually had identified 2 of the money laundering avenues used by Al-Qaeda 2 years earlier. So, bing, light bulb goes off. Yep, we should be using these folks, and yes, we should be paying attention to the open source, and yes, we should be paying a lot more attention to what private sector, industry, and academia can help us with as we study the patterns and the problems out there in cybercrime. Another thing that happened that also made the light bulb go off again, we, like a lot of offices, you know, in the Pittsburgh area, we had a plane that went down, so we were fired up as anyone else to try to figure out what we could do to help. So we got the email and internet accounts of the 19 terrorists and reviewed them and did what we could to find information that was forensically valuable. Didn't find a whole lot, but in working with our talented folks at CERT, we actually identified a virus that was embedded in the email account of one of the 19 terrorists. And it was so far down in the binary code that we wouldn't have normally seen it in our initial forensic review, but it was because of the talented folks we were working with over there that helped us find the remnants of this virus and reconstruct it to show that this terrorist got this virus like most people. He was in someone else's email account, or Outlook address book, and it was emailed to him. So we were able to reconstruct that virus and where it came from to develop some very valuable information relative to terrorism that we otherwise wouldn't have seen. So just a couple of examples that said, hey, you know what? We need to really go after these partnerships more aggressively. They're very valuable to us in everything that we do or everything that we define as a priority in cyber. Well, this project that I mentioned earlier became the National Cyber Forensic Training Alliance, and that's a mouthful. I know we're pretty good in government about creating these acronyms that are not necessarily rolling off your tongue, but hopefully descriptive of what the group's all about. And for those out there that are familiar with our InfraGard outreach effort, we try to tell them, think of this as a place where InfraGard members can come and stay, and not just get together once a month or a quarter, but actually come and roll up your sleeves and work on the problem every day, because we need your perspective and we need your input and we need the information that you have. This illustration is just some of the folks that actually helped put this organization together. There's actually a lot more today, but it involves significant industry players, academia, financial services, a lot of folks. And at the time we were developing this, the Internet Crime Complaint Center was actually just evolving down in West Virginia. So we took those two sort of collaboration resources that were out there and put them together under one umbrella, recognizing that if we could do this in this region, really 90 miles apart, it's pretty small in the global context of geography, we'd actually have a pretty good group of assets pulling intelligence together that's extremely significant in this fight on cybercrime. As I said, the government evolves. We try to be nimble. I know that's a little bit humorous for some people, but we split the IC3 into two, and the unit that I oversee now, which sits within the NCFTA, is called the Cyber Initiative and Resource Fusion Unit. A lot of words again, but it is actually very descriptive in that we are trying to develop targeted initiatives on cybercrime that are a manageable bite of the apple, so to speak,